the partisan speech about all the terrible things that are going on. I think most of you, many of you would agree with that, but you know what they are. Some of the things we will have to deal with is, well, we can start with the Emoluments Clause, not the most popular clause. A clause in the Constitution that says that no federal official from the president to the postmaster may take anything, any gift, any emolument from a foreign power. And the reason for that is to make sure that there's no corruption, that the loyalty of the president and anybody else is to the welfare of the people of the United States as he may see it. We may disagree with him, but that's supposed to be his goal, not to his own pocketbook or anything else. And now we see, originally, that was of no great consequence. President Washington, you can take a gift if you get prior permission from Congress. President Washington reported that the Sultan of someplace or other had given him a horse. Congress told him how to dispose of the horse. President Jefferson reported that the Sultan of someplace had given him a ceremonial sword. Congress had put it in the Smithsonian. And that was the nature of business under the Emoluments Clause until the President Donald Trump, who's the first president who hasn't divested himself of his own business interests. Which means every time a Saudi delegation stays in a Trump hotel, it's money in the pocket of the president. Every time the Chinese grant an intellectual property grant, it's money in the pockets of the president. So when the president acts as he did, as he has in the last few days with respect to the Saudi Arabians, and people say, what is he doing? The question arises, is he doing that because of his conception of the public interest, because of arms sales are more important than humanity or whatever, or because he's in hoc, or he depends on investments from the Saudis? When the president acts in certain ways toward the Russians, toward Vladimir Putin, is that because he thinks that's the best thing for the United States, or is that because a lot of the money for his hotels and other things, to quote Donald Trump Jr. 10 years ago, comes from Russia? So there's a total conflict of interest, and our committee will certainly be looking into this. Senator Blumenthal and I brought a lawsuit again on this. We got 200 other members of Congress who joined the lawsuit. We won a victory about 2 weeks ago by surmounting. The administration said we didn't have standing to bring the suit, legal standing. We won that argument in front of the court. It's the biggest argument, the biggest hurdle. It will continue, but the Judiciary Committee will certainly hold hearings and deal with the conflicts of interest of the president, whether with the Russians or the Saudis or anything else. The second issue we have to deal with, let me just mention a couple of the issues we have to deal with. Suppression of voting rights, which we see all the time, which is in our committee. Suppression of the women's rights, attacks on women's rights, LGBT rights, denial of access to the courts, the whole question, obviously, of the rigging of the last election by the Russians, and to what extent the Trump campaign was part of that. All these questions are before the Judiciary Committee. How to deal with the White House interfering with the FBI so you didn't get a complete investigation of the Kavanaugh allegations, or the allegations in reference to Kavanaugh. Not necessarily the truth of the allegations, but the fact of the matter is that there wasn't a complete and honest investigation because the White House put its thumb on the scale. And how do we make sure that we have truthful and complete investigations? And how do we deal with that? So these are some, unfortunately, confirmations, whether judicial candidates or any other appointments, are the Senate's, which means the Senate Judiciary Committee, not the House Judiciary Committee. But the methodology that goes into that, we can deal with. So there are a lot of very controversial issues. Some issues that are controversial, but people don't think of as controversial. Intellectual property, music licensing, we just passed a major bill on that. But some of the things that are really getting to the headlines, which we will deal with, because we have to deal with it to protect the integrity of the government, to protect civil rights, civil liberties, and the integrity of the electoral process, and to repel the attacks on the democratic order. When you have a president attacking the press, calling them enemies of the people, the last major public official who used the phrase enemies of the people, to my knowledge, was Joseph Stalin. That was too radical even for Khrushchev. And now we have a president of the United States attacking the press as an enemy of the people, and seeking to bring pressure to bear, and bringing pressure against the FBI and the Justice Department not to do a fair investigation when he's involved. These are all challenges to the democratic order and to the rule of law, and we'll be in the center of meeting all these. So I just wanted to mention this. I have time for one or two questions very quickly, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Are you considering anything the voter repression that's going on?
I mentioned that. That was one of the first things I mentioned. Yes, we will. A lot of things about the voter repression. In 2006, Steve Chabot, a conservative Republican from Cincinnati, and I, as a then chairman and ranking member of the Subcommittee on the Constitution, chaired hundreds of hours of hearings, assembled a 15,000-page record, because the Supreme Court had told us, wrongly I think, nonetheless we had to follow what they said. Congress needed a major record in order to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. We voted to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act we recommended it, I should say, to the House as a whole for 25 years. The House as a whole voted 395 to 20-something to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act in 2006 for 25 years. The Senate followed suit. President Bush signed it. 5 years ago, in 2013, in Shelby County decision, the Supreme Court eviscerated the key provision of the Voting Rights Act. Key provision, one of the problems you had after the 1957 and 60 Civil Rights Acts was you guaranteed people the right to vote. And along comes the state of Mississippi or Georgia or wherever, and they and they passed a law suppressing the right to vote on a racial basis or discriminatory basis. So someone brings a lawsuit. The lawsuit works its way through the courts. Meanwhile, you have 3 or 4 elections passed in which this terrible law is in effect. The courts declare this law unconstitutional, and you throw it out, and the legislature passes a new law, and you start the process over again, and meanwhile you're still suppressing the vote. To stop this process of whack-a-mole, which has been going on for a long time, Sections 4 and 5 of the Voting Rights Act were passed in 1965. Section 5 says that in a covered jurisdiction, which had a record of voting discrimination or several other things, you could not change a voting law, an election law, or procedure. You could not move a voting place from here across the street without getting pre-approval, pre-clearance, it was called, from the Justice Department or from the District Court in Washington, that this did not have a racial discriminatory impact. And that effectively stopped most of the voting suppression. Section 4 of the Act defined the test by which you decided which jurisdictions were covered jurisdictions. In the Shelby County case, the court declared Section 4 unconstitutional on the grounds that it was based on tests and behavior prior to 1965, and the country is much better now, and discriminatory states in 1964 probably aren't discriminatory anymore, we don't have to worry about it anymore, and so it's unconstitutional. But you could, the court invited Congress, you could enact a new section of law with an up-to-date way of determining who's covered by Section 5. We've tried to do that, we've been blocked by the Republicans. We will certainly try to do that again, and depending on the politics, that's going to be a very high priority, not depending on the politics. The House, if it's under Democratic control, will certainly do that. If the Senate's still under Republican control, we're going to have problems with it. There are other things we can put in the Voting Rights Act. We can mandate, we can govern federal elections. We can't govern local elections except for constitutional issues. But we can say you must have at least 20 days of voting. We can say you must permit mail voting, mail-in voting, I guess. Not mail, it's supposed to be nice. You must permit voting by mail. You must have automatic voting registration with an opt-out. We can mandate this for federal elections if we have the political power to do so. If we have a Democratic control in the House, we'll certainly do that in the House. If we have Democratic control in the Senate, we'll certainly do those things in the Senate. If we have one House, not the other, we'll struggle with it. But that is certainly a priority. I thank you very much.